Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we'll discuss the top 8 risks that can jeopardize a successful retirement and, of course, how you can future-proof your retirement. Retirement, the idea of retirement is you have all of your time. I'm going to make a separate video where I talk about the importance of retirement, why I believe as a culture we sort of sleep on retirement. We all want the money, and I do believe the system tells us we want the money first, because if you believe the money is the most important thing, then what will you trade for your money? Yeah, everything, which is your time, which is actually the most important thing. What is retirement then, technically speaking? Technically, that means retirement is when you have purchased all of your time. So whether you retire at 30 or 130, I want you to be able to purchase your time back. And once you purchase your time, life can be phenomenal. But there is a small chance that one of these 8 risks could jeopardize all the work you've done to buy all of your time so that you can create wonderful experiences with your family. That is why we're going to go over the 8 of them and what you can do to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, the list I'm referencing, I did put it together for you. I am trying to work on that where I give you some of the information so that you're able to take advantage of these strategies right away. And if you are interested in that, you can go to obsidianwisdom.com/retirement risk. As a funny side note, there used to be an S on it where it was retirement risk, but I couldn't say risk where I could hear the S, so I ended up taking the S off. So it's just retirement risk. If maybe you can say it better than me, and that always happens. So the first one on our list is market volatility. So that's a very fancy way of just saying a recession. There is, statistically speaking, there's about a recession once every 10 years. So that means you're probably going to have to deal with at least a couple of recessions in your retirement. What do you have in place to make sure that you don't lose all of your money? The reality is, if your retirement is designed for everything to kind of be rainbows and skittles, where you're going to get this 10% return every single year, and you don't even consider what will happen if a recession occurs, then there's a chance that your retirement can be significantly cut in half, where your money may have lasted 30, 40 years, but a couple of retirements, maybe it drops your retirement funds to 10 or 15 years. And so you can see how it becomes very important to leverage some strategies to make sure you don't run out of money. The most common one is diversifying your portfolios, whatever you're investing in. There are some things that perform really well in a recession, and they don't perform that well when we're not in a recession. There are some things that are phenomenal during a time of economic growth. Then there are some things that are just kind of meh during a time of economic growth. By creating investments that puts this fund in a way that allows you to maximize your money, then you can protect yourself. So, for example, when there's a recession, a lot of people buy alcohol, right? They're dealing with depression, lost jobs, and different things. A lot of people go grocery shopping because I still have to eat, and then used cars and things like that. Those sales go up in a recession. These are things that the common human psychology, when you're studying economics, that's the decisions that people make. Well, what kind of decisions would you make if you were the general population when we're not in a recession? Then you would say, oh, we're going to get jewelries and trips and vacations. Okay, well then cruises and resorts and different places like that will be very nice to invest in when we're in times of economic growth. You also see a lot more companies are innovating and they're investing in new things. So you may find the metaverse, or at least the next future industry that's going to pop up. Maybe you invest in that. Research and development, when you're looking at companies during times of recessions, that's normally one of the first things that they cut. They're like, we don't have the money to be just throwing this money into some future that may or may not be here. I don't even know if my company will be around when this recession is gone. And so you find that a lot of companies end up cutting back on these. And how does that impact some of them? If it's a Silicon Valley company, a tech company, that could be the end of the company. Most of their advancements is the whole reason people like the company. And so you want to be able to say, okay, in a time of recession, what type of things do I want to invest in that will protect me? Is everything that I'm investing in, is it always all going to go up during a certain economic times and then they'll all go down during another economic time? If that's true, you want to be able to diversify your portfolio where you don't have everything that's only good in an economic growth. You don't have everything that's only good in a recession. As a result, you have to have some investment discipline, because you're going to look at your investments and you're not going to be excited for your entire portfolio at any given time because you're hedging against the recessions. So that means some part of your portfolio is going to be doing great and some part of your portfolio is not going to be doing good. But you have to have the discipline. You know that you put a plan in place that is sound and you're going to stick to that plan. The second one is your physical or mental health challenges. So 65% of people who are 65 or older will have a long-term care, issue, an event where they have to maybe go to a specialist or they have to be put in a facility of some kind or rehab. And I do have some of the numbers for you. So I actually took these from AARP. It says the average cost of living in a nursing home or a retirement facility per year is $107,000. To receive 40 hours of healthcare at home a week cost about, what is that? Why can't I see the little corner? It costs about $51,000 per year. So that's for someone to come to your home. A year in a one-bedroom assisted living facility has an average cost of $57,000 per year. So when you're looking at these long-term care events, so there is a high likelihood that you're going to have a long-term care event. And then I gave you these costs. What that ultimately means is if you don't have some sort of a plan in place, there's two choices, right? You either self-fund it, which means you said, all right, Dre, you said it's about $60,000 a year on average. And on average, it's about 3 years of retirement. That's about what the long-term care event is on average, it's about 3 years. So you'll say, all right, Dre, I have to find a way to be able to have $180,000 kind of put aside for long-term care. Now, you may say, you know what, Dre, based on that, I'm going to find out what the 35% of people do that aren't getting sick and having long-term care events, and then I'm going to do that. Whether that's changing my diet or picking up more exercise events, being more active and communicating with people, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure I'm a healthier person. And then the second option that other people will decide is they're going to get long-term care insurance. So there are insurance companies that offer long-term care. There's different ways that they're structured, so you'd want to be able to talk to a professional. But it's fair to say that if you don't want to cover it yourself, then you would leverage the money of someone else through insurance. Now, if you're considering that, they normally say somewhere around like 45 to maybe 55. I've seen some basically say if you go in after 60, the cost of long-term care significantly increases. I mean, like significantly increases. And because they have the same numbers, very fancy actuaries who are saying, hey, well, there's a 65, 70% chance that you'll have a long-term care event if you're 65 or older. So if I have a whole bunch of people at 60 coming in, then we're not going to be able to make all the payments and we're going to go out of business as an insurance company. And so they will say, okay, as we get closer to that 65, they're either going to charge you a lot of money or they're just going to flat out decline you. So if you are interested in a long-term care insurance, then you'd probably want to speak with someone who offers that. Maybe somewhere around like in your late 50s or early 50s. I've seen people start as early as their late 40s. Naturally, the monthly cost or the annual fee, however you have it set up, is much smaller the younger you are. But you don't want to be so early, because if you start so early and you're paying like $100 a month for an event that's going to happen in 30 years, you could self-fund it, right? You could put the money in an investment and then you can get a return on that investment that covers the long-term care event. So you don't want to start too early where someone's like, all right, Jerry, I'm going to go ahead and get long-term care at like 30. I mean, you could, but I would say why not just invest the money, because you could probably invest the money and get a better return so that your money is now working and then covers the event. It really does depend on each person's individual situation. So you'll want to make sure that it just makes financial sense, and then also understanding that there is an element of emotion in it, like a us part. So if you're able to stick to the plan, then stick to the plan. If you're like, Dre, I'm going to do something, then you should put as much control with someone else, but do it early enough so that you don't have to worry about the cost. The number 3 is an unexpected death of a loved one. You have set up where we're saying, okay, our Social Security and our retirement accounts, we're going to have this amount of money and then we're going to be able to live off of it. Well, if someone was to pass unexpectedly, that may impact something if they're getting money from a pension or they're getting money from Social Security, or that you guys had an annuity. If you had something where the income of the person changes the household income if they pass, then you want to say, all right, well, what are we going to do if one of us pass? Like, what's plan B? Are we going to put money in an account that both of us can access, like a joint tenants in common? Are we like, what are we going to do to make sure that we don't run out of money? Are we going to change the way it's structured, where instead of it being a single life annuity or a pension, that it's a joint life? And sometimes they call it like the love plan because it's you and your spouse. What are we going to do to make sure that the person's okay? Are we going to just get rid of all of the debt where either of us could live on one income? It's just icing on the cake to have two incomes. But having that plan in place is very important, because we don't know when our time is, and when our time is up, our time is up. Number 4 is supporting aging parents. And this is part of why I think retirement planning is the key to generational wealth. It's why I think it's so important, because if you are doing it right, then you're able to pass on an inheritance, you're able to transform your family's legacy for generations to come. Sometimes we start so late that we're not able to transform our lives, but at least we could transform the next lives. Now, sometimes we start so late that we just want to be able to cover ourselves. The opposite of that is called a reverse legacy. And so what that means is we don't have anything set aside for retirement, and Social Security is here, it's not here. I don't know how much you're getting, or maybe would be taxed on that. And so your children end up having to fund your retirement. And so that's a reverse legacy where you're taking money from them, which is fine. I mean, you've given them the best years of your life. You educated them, you took care of them, you watched over them. I'm not saying that if that's what you're doing, that you should feel any type of way about it. But what I am saying is that it does impact the finances and the disposable income that they have to be able to provide for their children. Now, if you are someone who wants to leave a legacy, I believe scripture even says that like great is a man who leaves his children's a legacy. And so I'm someone who believes that that could be financial, and it probably is as far as the literal interpretation of that particular passage. But you have the application of it as well, where you can pass on your wisdom. And there is an African proverb that says, when an elder dies, it's the same as a library burning to the ground because of all the wisdom and insight that you have. And so you want to be able to pass on your values, and you want to be able to pass on some sort of a financial legacy. But if you don't, then you may have to take care of your parents. And if you do, I would tell you to consider getting a long-term care policy on your parents. And the reason I say that is I've talked to a lot of people, and they will tell me how difficult it is to take care of their parents as they get older, and that if they could do it all over again, they would have gotten a long-term care policy, even if it was a small one, because then they could at least take off a couple days, and you could have a home health aide or an LPN nurse, someone that comes in and just kind of helps maybe once or twice a week, so that you could just take a break. Because it really is a lot to take care of someone on a consistent basis, on a regular basis. And so you just want to have something because you want to honor your parents. In fact, when I went to Nigeria a few years back, I was there for a few weeks. One of the cool things is basically my wife's dad's mother, so that's like my grandmother-in-law, they call her Nne, which means mom, and they would have it where the children who worked would pay one of the grandchildren to take care of Nne. And it was such an amazing thing because it was like this person put their careers and aspirations on hold to honor the elderly. And that's actually very common in the Nigerian culture, where you have this honor for people who are older than you. And I think that that is a really good idea. Now, culturally, there's lots of cultures that honor their elderly, but then there's also some cultures where they feel it's a burden. Like, I'm trying to live my life and I don't want to take care of you. And then they may put you in some sort of an assisted living facility. Now, granted, I'm not saying that 100% of the time that's the reason people make the decision. Sometimes it's just a lot, right? It's just a lot to take care of someone, and you simply cannot take care of the person. So you have to get help. And based on the numbers I gave you earlier, it may make the most sense to put them in an assisted living facility, because it does cost more to have someone come to your house each day to help you. And then it's also the mental toll that it takes. And so if you are able to plan ahead of time, you won't have this big gaping hole in your retirement plan, because you have been giving money to take care of your aging parents and taking them to their events, and maybe even having to stop working to take care of them, or moving closer to them, selling the house. There's just a lot that could change based on aging parents and their health. Number 5 is living too long. We used to joke with people where it said there's two things that you want to plan for. You want to plan to die too soon, and you want to plan to live too long. If you plan on dying too soon, then you normally have like life insurance and stuff like that. If you plan on living too long, then you want to make sure that you have enough money to cover you. So if you are someone who says, all right, if the average person lives in their 70s, so I think a woman is like 78 or 79, and I think the male is like 73. So if you said, all right, we're just going to plan for us to live to 80, and this is the amount of money we have, and if you had a Wisdomites financial planning login, then you can see what the percentage of success is based off of that. Well, I would then say, go ahead and bump that number from 80 to 90. because there is about a 50% chance that for a couple that if someone lives over 65, that one of those two will live to see their 90s. And I think I actually wrote it down. So in the 1900s, the average person lived to 47. That number jumped up to 68 in the 1950s. Now, keep in mind, that's just a 50-year bump that the average person now lives 20 years longer. Now, before you say, all right, Dre, well what's going to happen to us? In 2020, the average person lived to 77. So that's an 11-year bump in 70 years. So I'm not saying we're going to keep going up that same percentage every year, but it is going up. Now, recently, after COVID, the number's actually been going down. So maybe you don't have anything to worry about, right? I'm just tongue in cheek. I'm just kidding. But so the number actually in 2019 was 79, and that's kind of where it peaked. And then it went down to 77 in 2020, and then it went down again to 76 in 2021. But that doesn't change the fact that still, statistically speaking, there's a 50% chance that in a couple that someone will live over 90, just in a couple. So if you say, all right, what if life expectancy goes up to 100 years old? Do you have a plan in place for 100 years old? Do you have a pension or an annuity, which is like a personal pension, that's going to give you money every single month for the rest of your life, however that looks? Or do you have certain investments that are going to keep appreciating? And then maybe you can sell one of those assets, right? If it keeps appreciating, if you have like 3 houses for your retirement and each house generated you $2,000 to $5,000 of income each month, then maybe you would just sell one of them. You're just like, you know what, let me just sell one of them. I'm not going to worry about it. And then you invest that money, and now you're able to say, all right, now I'm good for another 20 years, another 30 years. But you have to have some sort of a plan in place just in case you live too long. Don't assume that you're just going to live to 80. You may live to 120, may live to 150. We don't know what's going to happen to life expectancy as we continue making advancements, as we're just entering into this AI new world. We just don't know that they may cure something and we all may be living a lot longer. Number 6 is your job loss. Some people I talk to, the plan is to never retire, which is fine. If you love your job, if you love the impact that you're making, if you love your company and the work that you do, God bless you. I think if you don't want to retire, because remember, retire is French. The French root word in retire means to withdraw. So what is it that you're withdrawing from? You're not withdrawing from everybody. You're not withdrawing from making money or providing a benefit or a service. Sometimes you're just withdrawing from me having to trade my time for money. And so I'm now going to only work on passion projects. I think that's a great idea. But at the same time, if something happens to you where you have one of those long-term care events, like I mentioned to you, you may have to stop working. And if your money is tied to actively working, then when you stop working, how are you going to generate the income? Which is why you have to have at least 3 streams of income. And that's generally what I tell everybody, because statistically speaking, 65% of millionaires, self-made millionaires, have at least 3 streams of income. And you want to have income that is generated whether you're awake or asleep, whether you're working or not. And they normally fall within 3 categories: the stock market, real estate, and a business. Those are going to normally be your 3 categories. So if you want to have 3 streams of income, I encourage you to choose the ones that are most interesting to you. Everybody doesn't really care for real estate, but everybody doesn't really care for the stock market. Everybody doesn't want to open their own business. So if you just find one of those avenues that makes the most sense for you, then you can have that passive income coming in when you're unable to work. And then when you get out of the facility in a year or 2, whatever the rehab looks like, you can go back to working. I mean, because you're working for passion. And I think that's great. If you love doing something, if you wake up and you're like, yes, today is my day, then I say keep doing it, right? Age does not dictate how we live our life. The choices that we make mentally is how we decide the type of life that we are going to live. Before we go into 7 and 8, if you are finding value in this video, I ask you to simply like and subscribe, turn on the notification bells. Also, if you are loving what I'm reading and you want to reference the guidebook yourself, you can go to obsidianwisdom.com/retirement risk so that you can download your own free guidebook. And then you can have this and reference it as you craft your own personal retirement plan. Number 7, we have inflation. Now, I don't have to say a lot about inflation because we're living through some kind of high inflationary times where inflation's been at a 50-year high. that would freak out a lot of people because your inflation is just a very fancy way of saying that your money is worth less than it used to be. And so my dad, he would tell the story when he was a kid that he could go to this corner market and he can give them a nickel and get like a bag of cookies and a soda. Now, I don't even know if you could buy anything with a nickel, but I can tell you that when I was a kid, that the checkout stand where you used to be able to get like a bag of candy, I could get it for, if it was on a sale where you can get four for $1. So I can get like a pack of Skittles. I can get 4 packs of the regular bag of Skittles at the checkout counter for $4. And then normally they were 33 cents. And then at the most I saw was 50 cents. Well, now it's like $1 and everything is there. So even the king size is like $2, where the candy's just a lot more expensive because of inflation. So if you don't plan for inflation, then the amount of money that you need is going to significantly change your retirement lifestyle as you get older. And so there is this average where if inflation goes up about 3% each year, they say that normally means that about 17 and a half, 18 years, I just normally say 20 years to keep it easy, but every 20 years, that means your purchasing power cuts in half. Or another way of looking at it is you need twice as much money to afford the exact same lifestyle that you used to have. And another way of looking at it is if it normally costs you $50,000 for your lifestyle, whatever that looks like, then in 20 years, you would need $100,000 to live that exact same lifestyle. Which is why it's super important that you have your money invested in assets that at least keeps up with inflation. At least keeps up with inflation. You can't just put the money inside of a savings account with a 1% return. I'm being very generous saying 1%. And then inflation is 3, 5, even 8% now. But at least the average is about 3%. That means you're losing 2% of your money every single year. Now, most people don't look at inflation that way. But inflation is you waking up and you automatically losing 3% of your money. What are you going to do to make that 3% back? And that's why when you have a job and there was a point in time where certain government workers in different positions where they froze your wages, that is technically them lowering your income, because if your cost of living goes up by 3% every year, that means every year that you don't get at least a raise that keeps up with inflation, it means that your salary was technically lowered 3%, which is crazy, I know, but the numbers are the numbers. And number 8, and the final thing that could ruin your retirement, is what we call sequence of returns, which is a very fancy way of saying your withdrawal timing. If you plan on retiring in 2010, then you probably would have said, you know what, I don't know if I could do it right now because we just went through the Great Recession. And the stock market, if your money was in the stock market, on average, it lost about 60% of its value. So if you had an account with $100,000 in it, then your account was only worth $40,000 in 2010 when you planned on retiring, which you would say, I can't retire now because I needed the $100,000. Now, granted, we can add a zero. So if you had $1 million in the account, then you only have $400,000 left. But you can see that the amount of money that you had significantly decreased because of the recession, which we talked about as one of the risks to a successful retirement. If you retire during a time that your investments are decreasing in value, then you're starting at a significantly lower amount. And so that's what we call sequence of returns. It shows that if you were to lose 10% in your first year of retirement, and then you were generating a good return after that, that first 10% dip, it requires more than 10% to get back to where you were at. As a result, it could take 5 to 10 years for you to make back the loss from the very first year. And then the opposite, if you were to retire and you had a great first year, and then maybe the fourth year you had the 10% loss, because you had the great first year, your money had already increased, and then it increased and increased and increased for the first 3 years. And then the fourth year you had a loss. Well, you're still up higher than you started. So that loss doesn't impact your overall retirement abilities the same as it would impact it if you had lost the money in the very first year. Sometimes this means that people will have to just go back to work because you didn't make any adjustments to your investments. So you had to take that 60% loss face on. And if you took it face on, then you may have to work. You may have seen that. I know people that were saying, you know, I'm going to retire and then I can't retire because something happened. I was invested in the company. I was invested in real estate. Whatever the situation was, you can no longer retire. So you had to keep working so that you can make back what you lost. Now, if you don't want to be in that situation, ideally, you will have adjusted your portfolio to capital preservation from a position of growth. So in growth, you're saying, look, I'm going to retire in 5, 10, 15 years. And that I feel pretty good about the time that I have to retire so that even if I had some losses in there, I have enough time to make my money back. I.e., if we go back to the recession of 2008 and 2009, if you worked another 5 years, 10 years, you've seen a huge growth in real estate values, in stock market values, and business evaluations. Now, you may say, Dre, that's a bubble, and you may be right. And some of it is hard to explain, but it doesn't change the fact that you made back what you lost and then some. If you didn't switch your portfolios to capital preservation, then that would be your strategy. You would just keep working until the market recovered, because it always recovers, or at least it has historically. I mean, right? Don't pin me down and say, Dre, you said it would always recover. We'll just say it has historically. But if you were able to switch to capital preservation, where instead of you focusing on growth, instead of you going for the 10, the 20% returns, instead of you were able to now just focus on having maybe an inflation beating return. So now you're at like 4%, 5%. And as a result, once your portfolio starts to lose some of its money because of the next recession or the downturn, you're not losing as much because you've already protected much of your gains. So while the average person may end up losing 60%, maybe you only lost 15%. But you were able to protect your ability to retire, so you can still retire right on time. And another thing that a lot of people like to do is, if you have certain assets that are tied in the market when we have a recession, they all go down. If you have something that's outside of the market, and then you can just focus on that money. So maybe you say, I'm going to spend out of my non-market account. And I'll put a link to the 5 best withdrawal strategies, because if you're able to switch from your investments that are in growth to your investments that are not focused on that, they're outside of the market, then it lets you leave your money in the growth, and you can now be able to say, okay, that money's going to come back. I can still retire because I have money outside of the market that I can spend on. When it comes to retirement, this one is normally called the 3 bucket strategy, where you have a bucket of your daily expenses, and so that may be 2 years of daily living, and then you have your moderate, kind of safe investments that won't take as big of a hit in your middle bucket, and then you have your growth, where you're not touching that money for 5 years at least, sometimes 10. As a result, you're able to say, all right, I'm not going to touch my growth bucket, but I have money outside of the market, so everything's going to work out just fine. And so you can do that as well. And again, I'll put a link to the best withdrawal strategies, just to make sure that you don't run out of money. Because at the end of the day, what was the point of working and generating and building all of this wealth for one of these 8 things to ruin it at the very end of the finish line? The way I normally put it is, if I'm speeding, then I almost never speed when I'm very close to my destination. Because to me, the feeling of getting a ticket when I'm 5 minutes, 10 minutes away from the location is much worse than if I got a ticket within the first 5 minutes of leaving in the house. You know, when I say it out loud, I don't want a ticket at all, but I do feel like I would feel much worse, because you're not able to save that much time in the last 5 minutes of speeding, right? It basically, it is what it is. But I'm putting a lot of risk, and then if I get the ticket, I'm like, dang, I should have slowed down. That's the way I feel a lot about your investment strategy. When you're 5 minutes to your destination, you're not really getting a lot of bang for your buck to really still be trying to hit the home run. I do think that it makes sense to slow down. There's no reason to get a ticket right before you exit. And in this particular case, there's no reason to risk losing 60% of your money when you plan on retiring within the next 1 to 2 years. If you found value in this video, again, I ask you to like and subscribe. If you would like access to the guidebook that goes over these 8 retirement risks and how to make sure they don't mess up your retirement, you can go to obsidianwisdom.com/retirement risk.